Hell, this is Bad Vibes. Today's stories all involve work. Joining me today is Horror on the Rocks. He'll be reading 3 stories in this video. If you enjoy his narrations, please make sure to help his channel grow. His link will be in the description and in the pinned comment. And sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm a 20-year-old female. I was working at a retail store and needed to use a bathroom. As I entered the employee's bathroom, I noticed that someone else was in there, hiding in the corner behind the door. I was immediately shocked and scared and didn't know what to do. I tried to leave the bathroom, but the person grabbed me and pulled me back inside. They were a customer who had snuck into the employee's bathroom to corner me, and I could tell that they had ill intentions. I struggled to break free from their grip, but he was way stronger than me. I screamed for help, but no one could hear me over the noise of the store. I honestly thought I was gonna die, but just as the person was about to do something to me, a coworker walked into the bathroom and scared him off. I was shaken and scared, but I was grateful to get away unscathed. I never thought something like that would happen, and it taught me to always be aware of my surroundings, even in a seemingly safe place as an employee's bathroom. So when I was in high school, I worked at Walmart. There were a few in my town that I grew up in, but this one was by far the biggest. It was also generally the easiest to get to because several huge roads ran right by it. Because of that, working as a cashier, you saw all sorts of people at all stages in their lives. Most people were nice enough, but every now and then, you'd get someone that just made you wonder about them. I was working later than I normally did one night because the Weather Channel was calling for snow late that night and school had been canceled. I didn't mind, I could use the hours. It was slow though because the normal pre-snowstorm rush had already been through and people were just holed up in their house waiting for the storm. I was on one of the express lane registers and finally had a customer come up. He only had a few things, but the first red flag was the way he put them on the counter. Normally when you only have a few things, you just set them up all at once, right? He held them out to me individually and would make sure that his fingers touched mine when I took them from him. I rang up his few things and bagged them. I told him the total and he handed me the payment all in ones and change, which means I had to count it, so it took a minute or two longer than a credit card transaction might have. In that time, he was trying to make conversation about how he was just at a club. With all the ones he had and the amount of meth it looked like he consumed on a daily basis, I can imagine what club it was. He told me that all the girls had turned him down, so now he was just gonna go home all alone and eat a sandwich of his own. I made some sort of sympathetic noise, finished counting and tried to give him his change and receipt. He made no move to get them from me and instead kept on talking about how they would taste so much better with someone else. Getting nervous, I made some comment about being underage because of the way he was looking at me, and I was pretty sure he was referencing me. Then he leaned across the register, ran his tongue across his nasty teeth and said, "Well, honey, that don't matter unless someone tells." For a second, I stood there in shock, then set his stuff down on the belt, turned my light out, and walked away to find my manager. I was lucky to have the Mama Bear one on that shift that night, so I knew she would take my side when she found out what happened. So to the meth-mouthed guy that insinuated that he was fine with taking a minor home, let's not meet again. So a few years ago, I used to work at a petrol station as part of a supermarket. It was on Christmas Eve, just working I'd say not so bad late shift. With about an hour and a half left on my shift, this drunk guy enters to buy some food. I served him, and I'll admit, since it was Christmas Eve, thought I looked the part as I was wearing a full face of makeup, mainly to save time after my shift as I was going out afterwards. The drunk guy just stared at me in silence after I rang him up, and I'm just staring back at him and say, "You all good now? You okay there?" And he says something with his speech all slurred. "Fucking hell, you're beautiful. Like, you got really nice eyes. Sexy eyes." I just respond with, thanks. Then he says, "Are you single? Are you? Please tell me you're single." I have a fiance now, and I've had more than a few encounters before, and what I've learned when I tell most of the people I have a boyfriend, either in honesty or just in defense sometimes, they don't give up and carry on badly flirting, because when I told him, "I'm not single," he quickly responded, "I bet your boyfriend doesn't even realize how beautiful you are. I can treat you better than him." My male colleague suddenly sensed that I was starting to get uncomfortable, but I looked at him and said, "Let me handle this." So I found a new way of shutting him down, which had worked for me 9 times out of 10 in situations like these, but only in this time it didn't. So I said, "Sir, my wife always notices my good looks." Yes, I tell him in other words, I'm a lesbian. The guy just stayed silent in defeat while he was, which I'm guessing, soothing that burn. I carried on filling a shelf. I had bent over to pick up an empty box on the floor, and just as I did, the guy came from behind me, and I shit you not, he slaps my ass and shouts, "I bet I can convert ya." Hearing that enraged me. Without a thought, I turned around and threw my fist into his face. I basically punched him, but it hit his cheek, and at that moment, my male colleague hopped over from behind the counter, grabbed the man who I sucker punched, and threw him out of the shop screaming, "You'll get worse from me if you ever come back here." I told my boss what happened, and thankfully, I didn't get in trouble for it, as she agreed he deserved it. A year later, same sort of shift, I was working with a young girl who was new to the job. She served customers while I was filling the shelves, trying to make room in the back for a delivery. I come out of the stock room only to notice the same guy has returned, and of course, he's drunk, again. I forgot to mention, this guy was probably old enough to be my dad. I stayed hidden in the back, hoping that my colleague would serve him, and hoped that he would just leave. But I noticed he kept saying to my colleague, "Hi, beautiful. How are you, beautiful? Oh, thanks, beautiful." But of course, he didn't leave. But I noticed he was trying to reach over the desk and touch her, while my colleague was pressing her back against the wall, trying to keep her distance, but trying to maintain the customer service character. I could clearly see that she was terrified, so I had to rescue her. I burst out the back and get behind the desk, stand in front of her, pointing her to go into the staff's kitchen to get away from him. Then I turned to the man and told him, "Listen, mate, you need to leave now." The guy laughs and says, "I'm not doing no harm, babe. I'm just chatting with her." I had to cut him off. "And reaching over to touch her, that's not okay. The girl's just trying to do her job. We are paid to fill the shelves and be nice to people. Get it through your head that just because a 20-something cashier is smiling at you and being nice doesn't automatically mean she wants to fuck your brains out." Then he started to get cocky. "Oh, I remember you. You're the lesbian with a nice ass." This guy was super lucky that there was a counter between us, and to add to that, he was also lucky there was nothing in my hand to throw at him. I held up my fist in response. "Yeah, I'm the lesbian who fed you this fist. Unless you want to turn the other cheek, I suggest you fuck off and consider yourself banned." He left the store with his tail between his legs. The funny part after this was there was a customer behind him, and the customer's jaw dropped after overhearing the whole thing, but he had time to hear the whole story. And I also explained to my colleague that I basically told the creep that I was a lesbian in hopes that he would back off, but he didn't, so I punched him in the face.
To give a little context, I used to work in an apartment complex. As a result, I've had my fair share of creepy encounters. Most residents keep to themselves and don't cause issues. Probably about 95%, but the other 5% took up almost all of my time. Isaac was one of the 5%. When he first rented his apartment, he definitely had stoner vibes, but he was nice enough and passed his background check. Almost immediately, however, he started causing issues. The lady next door complained she could smell his smoke constantly. The guy downstairs complained he could hear his stereo all hours of the day and night. Another resident accused him of following him home one night. The police were regularly there to break up fights between him and his girlfriends. We caught him hiding 2 large dogs in his apartment, and he regularly let them run loose, which ultimately resulted in another dog and 2 people getting attacked. He accidentally discharged a gun in his apartment once. Needless to say, he caused a lot of issues. At first, he was apologetic and said that he would make an effort to remedy the problems. But things kept getting worse, and after a year of weekly calls or notices from the office, he eventually became standoffish. One morning, I received a call from Isaac letting me know he'd broken up with one of his girls and she wouldn't leave the apartment. He asked me to personally come up and remove her. I'm a small woman, so even if I wanted to take the risk, I physically wouldn't be capable of wrestling an angry woman out of his apartment. I suggested that he call the police. He then asked if I could make a maintenance man come up to remove her. I offered to call the police on his behalf, but Isaac said that he didn't want to involve them and hung up. A few hours later, Isaac came down to the office with a jump drive and said that he needed to print out a 50-page plus document. Residents weren't technically allowed to use our office printer, but on the rare occasion someone asked to, I usually didn't say no. It was a good way to build good rapport. But between Isaac becoming such a problem tenant and how large his document was, I told him that I couldn't print his document. I gave the excuse that our paper, toner, and printer history was monitored and we would get in trouble for printing such a large document out for him. Not liking my answer, he started screaming about how it was bullshit. He accused me of being useless, bringing up my refusal to fight his ex, and power tripping. He called me a fucking bitch multiple times, and he said someone needed to bring me down a peg. I was pretty over him at this point and told him that if he was going to behave like a child, that he needed to leave. He told me I couldn't make him. Bluntly, I told him he would leave or I would call the police and have him removed. I also told him I would ban him from the office going forward. Normally, I tried to kill the residents with kindness, but his lease was ending in a week and I didn't care anymore if he hated me. My threat seemed to work. He angrily knocked my pen holder over and then slammed both doors as he left. The following morning, a cop was waiting for me when I got to work. He asked if Isaac was a resident and I confirmed he was. The officer explained that a body of a teen had been discovered the day before and Isaac was their primary suspect. He was the last person to text the kid asking him to meet where his body was found shortly after the message. The police believed Isaac had been paid to kill him. Based on the timing of the text and when the boy was discovered, Isaac would have had to left my office and gone directly there. Ultimately, the police wanted to use Isaac's move-out date as an opportunity to try and catch him. To nobody's surprise, he didn't show up. When I walked into his apartment to inspect for damage, there was a lot. I found a bank receipt from the day of the murder. Someone had wired him $17,000. I thankfully never saw Isaac again. He was caught in another country a few months later and is now in prison.
I'm a female, so when I was 15 I worked at a pizza place. One thing about me is I'm 5'1" and I look like I'm 12. Today a guy came in, about 50 years old, and he made me extremely uncomfortable. I walked up to the counter to take his order, as I was the only one available to do it at that time. And he looked at me and said, "Today is half price day, right?" I kinda smiled and didn't say anything because it wasn't funny. I'm literally just there to take his order. He kinda laughed it off and said, "I should grin more." He repeated the word grin instead of smile, which I found kinda odd. He finally told me what he wanted, and as I was writing it down, I'm pretty sure that's when he told another joke. I honestly don't fully remember what happened because I was so uncomfortable, and I think I tried to block it out of my memory. I didn't laugh or smile at his joke because I'm already slightly uncomfortable from the comment he made about me grinning. He's like, "What, do you not grin? Do you ever grin?" At this point, I was ignoring him. I finished ringing him up and walked away, and I started taking the order of whoever the hell he was with. The manager happened to be walking by. As he started walking away, he looked at her and said, "Do y'all have a policy against grinning?" and she kind of laughed and said no. I feel like more than that happened to make me feel as uncomfortable as I was, but like I said before, I don't fully remember the encounter. I'm gonna talk to my best friend about it tomorrow. She was there and saw the whole thing. She told me that as I was ringing up the next people, after the man and his friends walked away, all three of them turned around to check me out. A few minutes later, my manager told me that he used to come in all the time and tip the youngest girl that worked there, and that he's super creepy. After that, I walked away and started talking with my friend. I was literally about to cry, being so uncomfortable, and I just wanted out of this situation. My manager told me I wasn't allowed to take his food out to him when it was done, because of the way he is. I'm a female, and this happened when I was 16. I was working at an old folks' home as a dining room server. My job was to basically take orders, bring them back, give them to the chefs, clean, etc. I'm 5 foot, 95 pounds, a very small person. I look like I'm 18 with my hair up. So there was a couple, I call them Fran and Joe. They were very talkative, which was great and all. But I'm working. I don't have time to discuss what the activities are tomorrow. I was never rude or anything, just polite. My coworker, 17 female, got harassed by them first. They started off by asking if she was at least 19. Then they moved into, "Please spin around," which she did. And then Fran said, "We've decided you're pretty." So the encounter started with me, like a week later. I was squatting down to retrieve yogurt from a fridge. I stand up and look where they're sitting at the bar, and Joe is slowly licking his ice cream off his lips as he stares at my ass. Uncomfortable, but he has dementia, so I'll let it go this once. 3 days later, Fran called me beautiful, and then, a day later, she grabbed my arm. Dinner service was busy that Monday. We were trying some new stuff out. That totally failed. But I had taken their order, put it in, while Fran weighed me down, and Joe watched and grabbed my arm, tightly I might add. She asked me if I had put their order in yet, and I told her yes, the chefs are working on it now. She runs her hand up and down my arm and whispers, "Good girl." The next day I was taking a delivery service to a sick resident and came down. When the elevator opened up, Joe was standing there. We were perfectly positioned to switch spots, but instead he stepped in front of me and grinned. I moved to the side and he did too. Once, twice, and then I just slipped past. Now I brought my boss into it. He basically brushed it off, blamed their mental states, and told me to just leave it be. Well, I did until my last day of work. I didn't know it was my last day until the last incident. We had a party and us servers were outside. I lowered my mask for a quick second and Joe nudged Fran. He whispered something in her ear and she pulled out her phone and came over. She didn't give me or my coworker any time to deny a picture. With all their creepy encounters, I just gave up, talked to my supervisor, and quit. Meanwhile, they've done this to almost all the staff, and some residents there have been caught watching porn and doing stuff. So that was my over the summer creepy encounters that led up to me quitting a really fun, well-paying job. I'm not sure how to start this story, so I'm just gonna go ahead with it. My boyfriend, 20, and I, female 21, live alone and both work weird hours. He leaves for work around 10:30 p.m. and I leave around 4 a.m. It's starting to get cold outside, and I drive a 30-year-old Honda, so it takes a while to warm up. One morning I went outside around 3:45 a.m. to start my car so it would be warmed up by the time I was leaving for work. I went outside to start my car. There was nobody outside and no other cars that I could see besides the only ones parked in my neighbor's driveway. There was not a car parked in front of my house. Then at 4 a.m. it was time for me to leave. I got all my stuff ready and I was walking in my car. As I'm walking, I hear this man yell, "Hey!" I ignored it because obviously it's 4 a.m., dark outside, and I'm a female. But I noticed his car is parked directly in front of my house, which is honestly weird to me by itself. So then again he yelled, "Hey!" But it was a bit louder this time. I still refused to even look in that direction and pretended I didn't hear him. He yelled over and over again, "Hey, can I get a jump?" Asking him for me to jump start his car. He kept getting louder each time and seemed like he was starting to get frustrated. At this point, all I was thinking was that this guy wasn't out about 15 minutes ago. How did he suddenly pull up and his car conveniently die right in front of my house, all within those 15 minutes? So anyway, I continued to pretend I don't hear him, got in my car and immediately locked the doors and left. As I was driving away, I kept my eyes on the mirrors, and when I got about a block and a half away, I saw his car start up and he drove away perfectly fine. It didn't look like he needed a jump at all, so why was he asking me for a jump if his car could just start up fine? What would have happened if I actually tried to help? I could be overreacting, but the whole situation seems suspicious. My grandmother always says that a man would never ask a woman for help, especially with a car. And my boyfriend said that one time he wouldn't approach a female at night just for the simple fact of making them uncomfortable. I told him what happened and he said it was weird as well. I don't know if it could have been a trafficking tactic, kidnapping, or what, but it definitely was strange. One of my friends joked that someone could be watching my house, and I get that they were trying to be funny and lighten the mood, but it's definitely kind of scary when you have an experience like that. Especially because if someone was watching my house, they would know that I was completely alone for a few hours that night. Any thoughts? Still trying to wrap my head around this and figure out if I'm overreacting or not. This was just a few nights ago and honestly, I've been kind of scared about going out to my car or just being alone in general at night since.
Worked in a small memory care about 5 years ago, and there were only 2 of us on staff on the evening shift. We had an agency CNA come in to work with me, and it was our first time working together and meeting. This girl was young, 17 years old, and we began talking while we were working, and she told me that she needed to go out to her car real quick. She goes and comes back and tells me about her boyfriend and how they were arguing over text. She told me that he was waiting in her car until she got out of work, which was an 8-hour shift. Alarms were going off, and I was thinking to myself how weird it was, and I was going to go outside and tell him to leave. But still, a small voice told me not to, and I listened. Our shift goes on, and we're continuing to talk, and she was telling me how her mom doesn't want her to hang out with him anymore due to the situation that happened. The backstory is that they got into an argument in her basement, and he went upstairs and grabbed a knife, and her stepdad caught him and asked the boyfriend what he was going to do with the knife, and he said that he was going to hurt himself. She told me the story, and I had this pit in my stomach, and I looked at her and said he wasn't going to hurt himself, and he was going to hurt you, and you needed to get away from him. At the very end of our shift, we had a long talk, and I told her that she's too young to be going through this, and that there are a lot of other people out there, and she doesn't need to be involved with somebody like that. And I told her, the next time I see you, I don't want to see you on the news dead. The young girl left, and before she left, she told me that her mom was working for the same agency and would be coming in to work for the night shift. The young girl went on her way, and her mom came in, and I told her mom that she was still hanging out with that guy. The mom forbid her from seeing him, and I could see why, so I thought as a mother myself, I would want to know if it was my daughter. The mom was really thankful and gave me a big hug, and I went on my way. I started working at this agency myself and seen the young girl's stepsister, who also worked at the agency at the facility I went to. I got really excited to see her stepsister and asked how the young girl was doing since she referred me to this job. With a straight face, she told me that she was murdered. The boyfriend shot and murdered her a few weeks after I had seen her at my job. I feel absolutely sick this happened to her, and what the messed up part is, it's all over the news, and that's one of the last things I told her was, I don't want to see you on the news dead because of this guy. It really messed me up to the point of where I had to go to therapy afterwards. I'm glad I listened to my gut instinct because he could have easily hurt me if I went outside to tell him to leave when he was waiting in her car.
A few years ago, I was working at a pizza chain in my hometown as a driver. I was 27, but made darn good money delivering. I had worked at a few other places, both local and both chains, in the years before, and still work as a dasher on occasion, even after this happened. Now I can choose to deliver in much safer areas for this reason. I got luckier than I could even imagine. One night I was working and had a double, 2 deliveries to take. Both were cash orders. I had $12 left in my bank. The first order went smoothly. The guy gave me a $50 for a $35 order, so I was excited about the nice tip. I drove to the second delivery. It was an apartment complex with multiple buildings. I had delivered there before. The sun was about to set, but it was still very light out. The chain I worked at had us drive company cars with a logo on it, white sedans. This is important. I grab the order and go to the door of the apartment building. A young guy comes out, and a much bigger older guy was outside smoking a cigarette. The big guy went inside as the smaller guy came out. He looked around nervously and asked how much he owed me. The way that he was looking around just made me very nervous. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I told him the amount, and he said that that wasn't what they told him on the phone. Something was very wrong. I felt someone else walk out from behind me, from the door, as the first young guy looked around down the parking lot, craning his neck as if he was looking for someone. I told him the amount again, and broke down the order, trying to keep him calm. Then the first guy held a gun at my right temple. I also felt a poke in my spine. 2 gunmen. I couldn't speak. Words wouldn't form no matter how hard I tried. "Give me your money and keys now." The first guy growled, and I fumbled immediately for my keys. I gave him my bank card, but I hadn't realized that the 50 was mixed in. I gave him the keys, trying my best to remain calm. Another guy came up from the left. He had poofy hair and was around the same age as the first kid. The big hair kid grabbed the pizza bag and ran off and hid. The first kid searched the company car. Luckily, I left my wallet in my personal car. I saw him grab my cell phone. That's when the panic began to set in. I had pictures on that phone that I hadn't backed up of my 5-year-old son, who is absolutely my world. Please don't take that. I have pictures of my son who died on there. It's all I have of him, please. I lied. My son is very much alive. The kid behind me spoke softly. Trust me, just listen to him. You'll get it back undamaged. I don't want to be here either. I could tell that he had been crying by how his voice sounded. A car began pulling in, and the 3 boys took off to the other end of the complex in full sprint. Before the one behind me ran, he dropped the gun right in front of me. Standard issue 9mm silver and black. Safety off. Looked completely real to me. He picked it back up and ran with the others. The car that pulled in saw me. It was a woman and her kid. Panic set in as I realized they could easily come back and do way worse to me as the sky started to get dark. I collapsed. They had taken my company car's keys, $72, the pizza, and my phone. The woman ran up to me and asked me if I was alright. She took me into her apartment in the next building over and locked the door. I was shaking so hard I couldn't even hold her phone up to talk to 911. As she set down her kid, her boyfriend, I assume, helped me call. I spoke to the operator and told her everything. I'm colorblind, but these guys were obviously wearing all black and white clothes, thank God. I had a full description of 2 of them. The poor woman who helped me was going to be late to work, but she stayed until I was off the phone and the cops had shown up. Man, she was harsh and blunt with the operator, but I'll never forget this woman's utter kindness to me and her boyfriends. Cops showed up and contacted my store, and my manager brought out the spare key for me to drive the car back to the store. After dealing with the cops, I drove back and was greeted by crying and beyond worried coworkers. All of them were terrified that I was hurt. It meant a lot to me about how much they cared, but I told them that I was fine. I filed the proper paperwork, and the $72 was written off as a loss to the store. Thank God, because I had worked at other stores that would make you pay back the money out of pocket, even if you were robbed, to prevent the drivers from stealing. I was told by the owner to take the rest of the night off and take care of myself. He gave me a hug. He was to this day one of the best bosses I've ever had. What I didn't know was I was in for a very long night. I called my best friend before I left the store from the store phone and asked where he was. We usually met up for drinks after work. He was around the corner at a bar, so I met up with him. His dad was a District 4 cop in my city at the time, the same district that this happened in. He told me that his dad had given him the heads up and he had 2 shots waiting for me to calm my nerves. After the 2 shots, we began playing pool when his dad called his phone and asked if I had met him yet. He said yeah and handed the phone to me. His dad asked if I could come to the station. I was honest and told him that I had 2 shots, so he sent a squad car to get me since it wasn't too far away. We get to the station. They had the suspects in custody and I was needed to ID them. 3 boys and the driver. They had been caught less than 20 minutes after robbing me while speeding. The bolo had already gone out and they matched the description. They'd used the money to buy weed and gas and had taken off. They had at least 15 stolen cell phones on them. The order had been placed on one of the stolen phones. My phone was in the mix, in the box. The police told me to grab my phone only and I did. They asked me to unlock it. It had fingerprint verification, so it was easy. 9 out of 10 tries to unlock it had already been used before my phone would have completely reset. It was unlocked. I told the police every detail yet again, although my parental instincts kicked in. I told them that the guy behind me obviously was bullied into this, and to show mercy, he was the one with the white shirt. The police went wide-eyed and told me he was the one talking. The other 3 denied involvement. That's when I found out about the 4th guy, the driver. We found out later that he was completely unaware of the robbery and was just picking up his friends. He was never charged. The boy who was behind me and the one that grabbed the pizza were 15 and 16, and both got 6 months of house arrest. The only reason the one behind me got off easy, despite having a gun to my back, was because I asked them to go easy on him. That he seemed like a good kid who didn't want to be there, and he was the only one confessing. Makes sense, since he said the other guy wouldn't have my phone for long. He was planning on going to the cops had it not been caught. But the other guy, the first kid who put the gun in my temple, it was his 18th birthday. He got the book thrown at him. In the courtroom, he made fun of me and was laughing at me. Seeing him made me panic. The judge scolded him over his behavior, and he just grinned and glared at me with a Joker-like grin. All I could see was pure evil. This kid will commit more crimes, and I have no doubt that he will eventually take someone's life. You could see how cold he was just looking in his eyes. I grew up in a town full of murderers and abusers. I have never seen that kind of evil in my life, and I never want to see him again. I asked to have my name stricken from the records and asked to remain anonymous if the case ever got out. I'm so glad I did, because today I got a letter from the state. He's being released in February. The court had my old address, my parents' house, and my mom didn't think the letter was important. I missed a deadline to protest his release for probation. The plea deal was 8 years, and it had only been 4. He was getting out due to overcrowding, not good behavior, overcrowding. He'll be out this coming February, and I'm ready if he finds me. My wife, my parents, everyone I know knows his face and name. If he tries anything, we are ready, but for his sake, let's not meet. Hey, I'm a lifetime lurker. Figured I'd post about a weird experience I had when I was 17. I'm 25 now. I'm a woman, dress size 24 to 26. That would be kind of important later. I used to work at a popular women's wear plus size store. It was my second job ever, and I worked there 3 times a week after school. I usually worked closing with my manager and one other woman. However, our manager would leave at 6 p.m. and I would be there till about 8 p.m. with my coworker. I should also mention, I was the youngest of our team. Everyone else was in their 30s or 40s, and there was some internal mistreatment as a result. A lot of them, it was speaking to me like I was a toddler, or making snide remarks about my appearance. I had piercings, dyed hair, stretched ears, etc. I had 2 core work friends that I loved dearly. They were in their 30s and 60s, fabulous people who were also alternative, but sadly the rest of them were competitive and mean-spirited. There's one particular coworker who I was closing with that night. She was very fend for yourself with almost all the staff members. She was very proper, very religious, so she hated me, and she took everything super literally. A real peach. It was about 7:30 p.m. and we were starting to do our closing tasks. I was putting clothes away, cleaning tables, etc., and my coworker was behind the cash register. A woman came in, maybe mid-50s, skinny, lanky, short hair, skin damage level tan, colorless eyes. I'm talking pupils and nothing else. Looked like she lived in a fire pit. She didn't say much at first, but made a beeline for the lingerie, which is where I was cleaning. She looks over at me a couple times, and I get the feeling she's trying to steal. I subtly let my coworker know by using the code word in a sentence, and she notes the same thing. I kept my eye on the woman for about 15 minutes. During this time, she would shuffle between racks almost like a crab, side to side, back always facing me, muttering something to herself, and her hands would move jaggedly and sharply towards different items. She almost looked animated. Her movements felt unnatural. Eventually, she turns to face me. She has a pile of lingerie hanging on her arm. She smiles widely and says, "My wife and I had an argument. She won't let me come back to our apartment until I give her a gift. I'm thinking something that will benefit both of us, if you know what I'm saying." It's at that point that she nudges me. I, a nervous teenager, nervously laugh and ask if she knows her wife's size, pointing out that she had grabbed multiple different sized items. She ponders for a moment and says, "You got more brains than me. I don't know her size actually, but come to think of it, she looks a bit like you." As she's saying this, she begins to hold up lingerie against my body, sizing me up. This made me extremely uncomfortable for obvious reasons. Anyone touching me against my consent is a big no-no for me already, but especially in a sexually objectified manner, regardless of who they are. I take a step back, turn to my coworker, and give her the help me eyes. It was at that point my coworker shrugged and turned the other way. I could swear she was giggling at the situation, and I realized I was now alone in dealing with this woman. I gently offered an alternative option, a bathrobe. A pretty safe bet, and more flexible if it's oversized or undersized. Plus, you can return a house coat. You couldn't, however, return a lace thong. The shopper practically jumped at the idea, still giddy and animated, and I start to think she merely had a lapse of judgment before. Boy, was I wrong. She takes the robe from my hands and goes, "Oh, this is perfect." But I'm still hesitant about the size. Say, you guys offer try-ons, don't you? We did. We would sometimes model products for customers with limited mobility who wanted to see garments in action. I shook my head at this and explained that we only do that for business attire and not for casual wear or lingerie. She sighs, scuffles around, and goes, "Well, you're the same size as her. Let me hug you to be sure." Before I could react, she put her arms around me. I froze, couldn't feel my arms or legs. I remember my heart racing as she patted my lower back. Something finally kicked in, and I took a quick step back, but I couldn't say anything. I was shocked. She smiles and goes, "That wasn't so bad, huh, baby?" And I was right. You're exactly like my woman. Curves in all the right places. You sure you can't amuse me and try this on? Every word put me on edge. I began stepping back to the safety of the cash register counter where my coworker was. It was at this time my coworker decided to clean the fitting rooms. Once safely behind the cash register, I check the time and say, I can't do that for you. Against store policy. Are you buying the robe? We close in 5 minutes. She seems surprised about the change of tone. I'm in a full freeze, flight, fight mode, and my emotions are all over the place. I just want her gone. Yeah, I'll take it. She goes to pull out her wallet, Surprise, surprise, no wallet in sight. She fumbles around for cash for a good 5 minutes or so. During this time, she decides to go into extensive detail about her and her wife's sex life and how it got worse after they got married. Eventually, she finds a crumpled up $50 bill and buys a robe, confirming that it was returnable. As she leaves, she says, "If she doesn't like this, I'll be back tonight. If you're not here, I'll come back every day until you are. I like you." I told her that we were now closed, and my coworker unlocks the door at this point and gestures for the customer to leave. She didn't have any parting words after that, but did blow a kiss at me on the way out. I winced at it. That's all I know. My coworker giggled when the woman left and said, "She sure did like you." I didn't say anything back, got my stuff and left. About 2 weeks later, I put in my 2 weeks notice following a similar incident involving a serial shitter using our changing rooms as a bathroom. He would also try on women's lingerie. That's a story for another time. Thankfully, the robe woman never showed up again while I was still working there. Although, at one point, my manager told me that a short-haired woman was looking for me during the hours of the following day. I'm certain it was her. So glad I'm safe now, but it was definitely one of the creepier encounters I've ever had. I'm a 24-year-old female. At the time, I was 21. I lived in a small city in the Midwest. At the time, I had no car, but a bicycle, and hardly enough money for public buses. I worked at a retail battery, lighting, and repair store. I worked there full time and only lived a little over a mile from my job. Since I'm a female in a male-dominated field, I was often used to targeted abuse from men that thought they knew better. Many times I stood my ground and flaunted my knowledge in subjects that these men couldn't grasp. Because of my willingness to learn and my close proximity to work, I often worked all sorts of hours, mostly by myself. This time I wasn't the closing person and had a coworker, Joey, 22 male, who came in for a part-time shift after he wrapped up his classes at the local college. We had a close friendship, and we often stood up for each other and stood in when we were flustered or needed to go to the bathroom in the back. Joey received a call on a possible repair on a smartphone, probably LG, a low-tier phone though, and he wasn't 100% sure if it was a phone that we could repair. He asked a young female caller to stop by for a consult. She had quickly agreed and said that she would stop by at around 5:30 p.m. This was the night that I was supposed to get done at 6 p.m. and catch the bus at 6:12. It was a windy, drizzly early fall night. I remember because I had my bike with me and it became my anchor that night. A little after 6 p.m., this frantic, terrified, bawling 19 to 20-year-old woman came into our tiny shop. I was at the counter switching out aging price tags and doing general store maintenance. I looked at her confused, willing to help. She looked at me in deep eyes, asking if Joey was here. At that time, he was pooping in our tiny bathroom in the back, so I had to step in and help out any customers. I told her that he was currently busy, and I was willing to help her. She handed me her smashed cheap phone, very timidly. My customer service skills couldn't prepare me for what she was going to say next. She quietly told me that her boyfriend, who was out in the red truck in the small parking lot, got angry and smashed her phone when she tried to call her sister that afternoon. I took the back end off the phone and tried to research the model for any possible screen repair. No results found. I tried to hand back her destroyed phone and she pushed it back into my hands with a pleading look. Then the honking commenced. There was a light drizzle outside, so the front glass door was covered in beaded drops and was slightly fogged over. I couldn't see who was honking out there. I told her that I couldn't help her and for her to try our cell phone repair competitor down the road. The tears started to really flow down her cheeks and I was freaked out at this point. She kept throwing glances behind her and the honking would not stop. I shook with fear and rage at this point. I myself was in a domestic abuse situation at the time and knew what this girl was experiencing. I broke my locked stare at her and tried to look in her system a second time for a replacement screen. Nothing. I looked up from our computer and saw a shadowy figure of a young man pacing in front of the store. I was just happy that the honking stopped, but I was increasingly shooken up. My whole body vibrated with fear, and I whispered across the counter if she needed me to call 911. She slammed her hands down on the counter, said that I couldn't do that. She begged me not to. At this point, Joey came out from the back and asked me what was all the honking coming from. We had a lot of elderly, farmers, lazy, or disabled customers that would honk their horns for us to pick up heavy battery cores from their cars. He thought that it was one of those situations, but with a look on our faces, he knew that something horrifying was happening. The young guy stopped pacing outside and began banging on our front door. Joey took the girl's phone from my hand and said for me to go in the back and lock the back employee-only doors. I did what I was told, grabbed my bag, my bike, and my jacket. I looked at the clock in the back and it read 6:14. I spent 15 minutes with this girl, both of us feeling like trapped animals. Joey did bodybuilding during his free time and was a gentle, non-confronting, short and stocky Asian guy. I was a short, obese, kind lady that would respond either of two ways, like a doormat or ready to stand my ground. I knew I couldn't fight a customer, and neither could Joey. Not because of physical reasons. We'd lose our jobs, and I had no idea what to do. The young guy threw the door open, and the wind kept the door open. He had this manic, hateful look about him. A total predator he was. He was slim but muscular, early to mid-20s, and at that point was soaked by rain. He took the broken phone off the counter and took the girl in tow. He hurled insults at us, and I gave the girl a pitied look. He slammed the door shut, and both Joey and I stood there in absolute silence. He snapped out of it and ran to the front door and locked it. I told Joey to call the manager of the store from our landline and stood around while he did. I noticed that the guy had moved his truck directly in front of our door. He was watching us from his truck, watching us behind the counter as we were on the phone with our manager. I had to leave to go home. The last possible bus came at 6:42, and I couldn't pedal my way home in this weather after all that just occurred. Time was around 6:18, and I just needed to cross the busy highway, go down the sidewalk about 1/8 of a mile to the nearest bus stop. Joey, the guy, and I played a waiting game. It was 6:23 when this dickhead finally left our parking lot. I told Joey that I would leave at 6:25 so I could arrive at the stop safely. Joey opened the front door, and I threw myself on my bike, pedaling harder than I could ever imagine. Now mind you, our store was in an industrial shopping area at the very edge of town. We worked next to a sub shop and worked across from a strip mall with a bullseye store and a local chain grocery store, with other retail stores and a bank all in that large lot. It started to downpour. As I tried to pull out of the parking lot, straddling my bike, I caught a glimpse of the red truck looping around the sub shop. The highway had dual lanes each way, and I had to play real-life Frogger if I wanted to make my destination in one piece. There was a few cars that slowed down for me as I hauled ass to the other side of the road. I jumped off my bike and threw it on top of the curb. I promptly hopped back on and tried to pedal off. My front wheel was stuck in the grassy strip, and my right foot slipped off the pedal. My shin struck the pedal and I had to act quickly. I grabbed the frame of my bike and jogged awkwardly to the bus stop. The red truck pulled into the bank parking lot, of which I had just passed. The truck pulled around and went through the entrance across from the sub shop and took the closest lane to me. He went at a crawl and turned at the red light so he could circle the main parking lot of the shopping center. There were 3 ways into the parking lot, one to the left, one in the center, and the other one to the right next to the grocery store. I stuck to the sidewalk since it felt safer and was in front of people. The truck patrolled the parking lot looking like a hunter stalking its prey. I felt cold, sore, and concerned just like an injured animal. There was a couple of cars that pulled out into the left entrance of the parking lot, causing the truck to stop from re-entering the lot again. I almost collapsed in the shitty bus stop, and I felt my phone buzz. I saw that it read Joey, so I rested my bike on my person to answer the call. Joey told me that he was watching, and even though he had an elderly couple in the store that he was helping, that he wouldn't allow this guy to hurt me. I started to cry. All of this had just gotten to me. The red truck looped around again and again. I saw my bus pull up early at 6:39, and I couldn't be happier. I knew the driver since I used this bus to get all around town, errands, shopping, and to go to and from work. I had my stupid fucking bike with me to worry about. I hung up the phone with Joey, putting my phone in my jacket pocket, and strapped down my bike on the rack in front of the bus. I struggled since I was shook, and my bike was slick from the rain. I got on the bus and turned to the open bus doors and saw that the truck took a left at the center entrance of the lot. I could finally let my guard down. I sat in the front of the bus, my hands shaking, while trying to get the $1.25 for the fare. The driver said it was okay and that I could take my time with the change. I kept my backpack on and pulled my damn phone out of my pocket, dialing Joey's number, letting him know that I was fine. In under 15 minutes, I made it to my apartment safe, but deeply disturbed. I took my bike in so it wouldn't draw any attention to where I lived. All of this gave me the idea to leave my own domestic abuse situation. To this day, I wonder about that girl, and I hope that somebody more darling and stronger than me called the cops on her abuser. That she had the strength to leave that violent man, for her to write her own story, and recover from it all. I'm currently doing significantly better in life and finally have my own car. I live a couple states away, safely from my past life. Even though it's states away and it's been 3 years now, let's not meet.
A few years ago, I moved back to my hometown after divorcing my ex-husband. About a year after I moved back, I got a job at a local boutique. My workspace was in the back, where the girls took deliveries and the clothes were stored before being put out front to sell. Soon after I started working there, I realized that all the girls were creeped out by our local FedEx driver. When the girls saw the truck pull up outside, they'd usually yell, "He's here!" My boss would literally hide in her office so she didn't have to talk to the guy, and it didn't take me long to figure out why. Now, I'm a very friendly person usually, and I like to treat everyone the way that I'd want to be treated. This driver, let's call him Jeff, would come in to drop the boxes off, and he'd always linger. He would make conversation, and his conversations got progressively weird. The first time I met him and introduced myself, he said, "Oh, did you used to work at the funeral home?" It was a little strange to me, but it's a small town, so I just said yes, and that was it. I hadn't given him my last name, so I just figured he remembered my face. One of the next times he came, he told me that he'd just dropped off some packages off at my house. When I looked at him and asked how he knew where my house was, he just laughed and said, "It's not a big city. I remember names and don't take long to realize who's who." It made me feel weird, and when I told my boss about it after he left, she agreed it was weird, but I just kind of let it go. When my girls told me that the FedEx guy was weird and said that he always tried to talk to them when he came by, my warning bells went off. One of the next times he came in, he made a remark about a big box he had delivered to my house and gave me a couple of small packages that were addressed to my house and said, "With it being so close to Christmas, I don't want to leave these. I know you don't have a big man to get that box inside, so you want me to come help you get it in that house when you get off work?" I immediately replied, "No, I got it, but thanks." This remark creeped me out bad. That told me that he was either watching my house or paying attention to the names on the mail. Either way, it was enough for me to warn my girls not to answer if he came to the house and to start trying to hide when he came in. One day, I even heard him ask one of the girls up front where I was. I started trying to take my lunch break around the time he made his deliveries. I did everything I could to avoid him. One evening, I heard a knock at the door of my house and then the sounds of packages being left on the porch. I waited a minute or so and then went to get the boxes. Jeff was parked in the church parking lot across from my house, watching. As soon as I came out, he grinned and waved and then started to get out of his truck. I quickly backed into my house and shut the door. He didn't come knock, but his truck was in the parking lot for another 15 minutes or so. My daughter watched him from the bedroom window and told me he kept looking at the house, and I figured he was waiting to see if I'd come back out. I called the local FedEx facility to report it. I explained the whole story, and the manager told me they would look into it and thank me for letting me know. I figured nothing would be done. A couple days went by, and I got a call from a manager at the FedEx facility. He told me that Jeff would no longer be a problem and apologized for everything. I assumed maybe they changed his route or something, but the next driver happened to be a high school friend, and when I jokingly told him, "I'm glad you're our FedEx guy now. That last dude was a creeper," he said, "Yeah, he got fired. Dude was stalking folks apparently." It made my blood run cold. I watched for him for months afterwards. It's possible that he was just overly friendly, but I don't think so. I used to feel bad that he lost his job, but he crossed too many lines.